Welcome guys, today I'm going to talk about my 2024 prediction for Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, and let's finally start with the solid Harris states. They are Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois of course, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut of course, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, DC. Not much to say here, but you can literally put any Democrat and they will still vote blue by like 15% almost all the time. Also, don't let me forget about Maine's first district right here. And yep, for Trump, solid states for him are Utah, Idaho, Montana, of course, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, most of their districts, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, of course, Arkansas, Louisiana. All these typical, really ruby red states. Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia. Okay, let me talk. So, Trump, even though he has lost some of his support in the last couple months, he still and will still have a lot of his fan base in 4 years' time. The only states that I could see here maybe dropping down a bit to like the likely category would be like Kansas, Missouri. I would say more likely Missouri, but Montana. But I doubt all of this since Harris just doesn't have that appeal to the rural people that Biden had in 2020. And that same goes for the blue collar workers, really. And all of this brings up the safe states to 112 for Trump and 180 for Harris. Okay, getting more interestingly, the likely Harris states, those would be Colorado, first off. It wouldn't be as big of a win that Biden had in 2020. Only would drop a couple points though to like 10, at most 9%, but I do think she would still win it by a decent margin. New Mexico, it could be really interesting. Depending on how Democrats do with Hispanics right now, and if they do mess up or something like that, it could really backfire to them. And there's a chance that Republicans could gain support from the Hispanic community even more, but not win a majority of the voting bloc, but still make some gains. But I do think that in this scenario, I do believe New Mexico will be around 8%. Worst case scenario for them 7. I just don't see it dropping below that really. While for Virginia and Maine at large, not much to say here really, but they're probably gonna be at the same place. They're not competitive really at all as they used to be maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But yeah, moving on to the likely Trump states. Those are the following. So first of all, Alaska. Even though it has dropped support for the GOP in the last 2 elections, I don't think it's going to be a big of a problem to them in the future. And in 2024, it should go to them by at least 9%, worst case scenario really. And at most maybe 12, 13 if they do well, since I just don't see too much happening that could affect it. So while for Iowa and Ohio, as I've said before, they're no longer swing states that they used to be. And they're going to be in the same spot really. And likely states for Republicans. And Democrats have failed here a lot at gaining support from really ancestral Democrats that have moved on to the Trump train like recently in both 2016 and in 2020. And with Harris, I just don't see the way that she could appeal to these ancestral Democrats from rural areas and blue-collar workers. And I would argue that if Trump is the nominee, she wouldn't do any better than what Biden did in 2020, and I think Trump would actually gain more support. Not support, but would have bigger numbers and would win here by like 9% at least, due to the fact that Harris just doesn't have the support that Biden had. Well, now for Maine's 2nd district and South Carolina, not much to say here. They're not competitive by any means, and they're gonna stay in the same spot since there's nothing big in politics that would move them. And overall, these red states are gonna vote red, and I would argue that Trump in 2024 against Harris would actually make some decent gains for the Republican Party in these areas. And as you can see, this would actually bring the safe and likely states for Trump and Harris to 148 for Trump and 210 for Harris. And let's see, getting even more competitive for the lean states. First of all, Florida. Trump living here is gonna of course help. I still expect it to be around like 3 to 4%, maybe 4 would be the most likely scenario, and to be a lean state. Just kind of similar to what happened in 2020. But if you would pick someone like I don't know, DeSantis as his VP, it would help him quite a lot. But until we know, it's still a couple years from now, so even if he does pick him, I'm just going to put as a lean state for now until we know more. But if he does, then that's going to, Florida's going to look really good for him. Now from Minnesota and New Hampshire, both of these states went really well for Biden in 2020, but with Harris, Democrats would of course lose support with rural voters and other similar kind of voters here. And I would think they would be lean states by, I would argue, around 3%, 4%, which would be a bit of a drop when you think about it. But still, of course, going for Harris. For the key state of Texas, let me talk about it. Pretty interesting what has happened the last couple months. Due to the lower turnout that would happen in this scenario in 2024, with all the demographics really, Texas would be around 4% in my opinion, maybe like a high 4, but like 4.5. And I also think this would happen since, as seen just a couple, I think month or two ago with the Texas winter storm, it has made people think of twice before moving here. And there are a lot of people moving from San Francisco and their moving here due to the lower taxes, and this is going to benefit Republicans here since less people are going to move here. Even then, in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, it went to Trump by 9%, and in 2020 it went to him by 5.5%. So even in a lower turnout scenario, I'm going to put it as a lean state by around 4.5 really. Now for Nebraska's 2nd district, I'm going to put it as a lean Democrat. It could change depending on how redistricting goes, but until then, I'm going to just leave it as a lean for now. Okay, now for the coin tosses. For Arizona, a key state to get to 270, whoever is able to get the endorsement from the McCain family will have a really good advantage. But with Harris being more left-wing than Biden, they might just stay quiet really and not endorse anyone. But overall, between Harris and Trump, and the relationship between them and the really higher-ups in Arizona, I'd say Harris would still have the advantage just barely due to migration from bluer cities into the South. And she would win here by like less than 1%. In Georgia, another state that flipped, even though you would think Harris would be the reason for it if it stays blue in 4 years' time. But the main reason for what happened in 2020 was because of Stacey Abrams. And if she is able to, again, get the same turnout as we saw just a year ago in 2020, then Harris would just win here narrowly due to that and the growing African American population that is just making the black vote even stronger here. Okay, now for Nevada, a state to keep an eye on. With less turnout for Democrats and Harris not being as liked by progressives, it could really be a problem for her. And if you look at 2020, there was a big turnout in the West Coast, but it was the same result, exactly the same result as 2016, which really begs the question on what could happen in 2024 with less turnout. This could really be a close race to call, and could also be a surprise for Republicans if things go well for them. But I would just give it to Harris barely though, by less than 1%. It could be the closest race really in 2024 in my opinion. But don't be surprised in 2024 if it's a tight race. While for the really important states, before I talk to them, I forgot about North Carolina. I do expect North Carolina to be at the same spot. Not much to happen really, and I just don't see a thing that could make a big difference then. So back to this. So for the really important states, in my opinion, let's start off with Wisconsin, which is going to be the hardest for Democrats to keep in the future with less turnout and Harris not being able to appeal the same way that Biden did to rural voters and blue collar workers. In my opinion, it would flip back to Republicans and Trump, just barely, but with a narrow win of like 1%. Next for Michigan, I give it to Harris by a slim margin, mostly due to the fact that the rural areas in Michigan are not as rural as other nearby cities and I should say states. Plus, Democrats have learned from 2016 and they will of course campaign here heavily. And Michigan has a lot of minorities and I think the most out of these states here of the Rust Belt, which in the end will help her win. Lastly, for Pennsylvania, so even though they do have really big cities like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, they also have really rural counties that near the West Virginia border. It's gonna be a big problem for Democrats if they do turn out. And with Democrats in this scenario, I strongly believe wouldn't turn out as much. I'd slightly give it to Trump, but I think it will be a really close race. And Harris just not being liked by progressives and rural voters and other demographics as much as Biden did in 2020 could be a problem. But as you can see, in 2024, if it's Trump versus Harris, it will be an extremely, extremely tight race. At the moment, I have Harris with 273, which is not that much of a margin really, and could go either way, against Trump's 265, which kind of reminds me of 2016 when the media said that Hillary was going to win with 272. So don't be surprised because, Trump in this scenario will literally only need Nevada and he wins or something like that. But until then, I'm going to put Nevada as a tilt Democrat just due to its history and everything. But there's still a couple years until 2024. Things can change one way or the other. It will depend on how popular Biden is and what role Harris will have, whether she's the VP or Biden is stepped down or something like that. But overall, this really shows you how tight this race would be. And this has been the toughest and closest scenario I've ever had to do yet. But yeah, this was my early 2024 election prediction between Trump versus Harris. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. And see you next time. Bye.